we can start and jump right into it. How would you like that?
Yep, very good.
Very good. So, welcome to our second knowledge share presentation. This one again is all going to be about popular science, but I think because we're translators, sometimes it's quite difficult to remember what we do and why we do it and where we came from. And I thought today we'll just have a look back and have a look at the history of translation and how what we do translates into today's code of ethic, because we're all supposed to and we'll follow the code of ethics of translators and interpreters. So just to see how those ethics have been developed through the ages and why we keep to them. So we'll have a look at the history of translation, and we will meet numerous of cryptographers and gentlemen of our art. As last week we talked about that the translators and translation and translators, we played quite a vital role in development of a society as a whole. So since medieval times, we were already a great help in development of languages, shaping national identities, forming scholarships, forming fellowships for us, people that speak more than one language. So through the ages, translation, translators, so we helped societies to move forward, and I think we need to remember that. Well, how come translation comes about? Before the translation comes about, we need to make sure that the language is developed and the writing began. So writing is a physical manifestation of a spoken tongue. And there is a theory, and the science confirms it, that we developed as humans, we developed spoken language at about 35,000 years BC. And how do we know it? So we have cave paintings, you know, Joe was here. So as humans, we kept scratching on walls quite early before we've learned how to speak. So we've got a lot of markings on the walls that sort of confuse scientists. Is it a tongue? Is it a story? Is it a language? So, and then slowly, the scientists have come to the conclusion that we can firmly say that the language has begun when the scratchings on the walls started to tell a story. So we as people, we started to speak. We wanted to say what's happening in our everyday life. So it's not just a little picture of a bird and a picture of a human. It's a picture of a human hunting the bird and then making a beautiful French pastry with it. So once we started to tell a story, the historians immediately thought, oh goodness, all those writings, they must be telling a story. But the first writings started as a means of a trade communication. And that came as a bit of a disappointment for a lot of historians when Sumerians, they first invented this idea of using pictographs, it's like emojis, and they would stamp them into the clay and will remember something, and then they will remember something. And the historians and the cryptographers and translators, we thought, oh my goodness, how exciting, we're going to learn something really, really interesting. But what we've learned is that those symbols mostly served as accounting tools. So how much grain has been going somewhere and how much sheep is going to be slaughtered, but we wouldn't have any idea why, or, you know, was it a festival? Was it designed for some religious celebration? So that was quite disappointing. So all our earliest records indicate that they were all records of commerce. And the thing we all get really excited is about beer. So translators and beer, it all goes hand in hand. Wine! Wine and beer, that is correct. So the archaeologists, they would get really excited when they uncover all those clay tablets and thinking, oh, goody, goody. This is beautiful, timeless pieces of clay. They will contain magic messages, you know, from the lives of ancient people. There will be, you know, descriptions of adventures and war campaigns and customs of that time. And well, no. The earliest records they could find were about beer. So beer and wine was the most popular thing in ancient Mesopotamia, and that's where we've got our earliest clay tablets. So, and they were all about the sale of wine and beer. So the pictograph, with this pictograph, one they deciphered, we can say how many jars or vats of beer or wine were involved in a transaction. But what the transaction was, we wouldn't know. Say Paul Krivashek, he's a contemporary historian, so he was very famous for laughing at this tablet they found. It's called Two Sheep Temple God Inanna. So sheep were shipped, a ship and a temple, and it was quite interesting. It was a record of a transaction, but you wouldn't know anything about it. Was it a celebration? Was it some ancient, you know, ritual about the moon calendar? We wouldn't know. So I picked a tablet for you to show. This particular one, a lot of people got a lot of excitement, spent a lot of excitement over it. But once they deciphered it, it was about beer, giving beer to workers. So these workers, they are laborers, they are builders. But we still don't know what they were building. All we know is how much beer they drank. So, you know, translators and beer will go hand in hand. So I was thinking, before moving forward, we can have a look at the definition of translation. Because translation been used by humans for centuries, beginning from the appearance of the writing, of the scratchings. And we've got a pretty dry one from an Oxford dictionary, and it says the process of translating words or text from one language into another. That's what translation is. We've got another one from Foster that's, I think, a little bit more poetic. So translation is a mental activity in which a meaning of given linguistic discourse is rendered from one language to another. So again, we can talk about it. So these are the meanings that are contemporary meanings that we use in today's defining our profession in today's time. And I think this is what drives our code of ethics. However, you and I think because we are professionals in this area, it's sort of we must remember that I think we are engaged. Like, I don't just think, there's a lot of history and research that suggests that our vocation is art, because the purpose of translation essentially is to convey the original tone and the intent of the message. So, and us as professionals, we take into account cultural and regional differences in source and target. So there is a popular idea that translation is art. So we literally paint a picture in another language, like that metadata we looked at last time. So we all have a lemon in our head, but we paint that lemon with different words in different languages. So, and it takes a lot of creativity and imagination. I'm very happy to be of a tribe. All right, so back to the history, and we'll start with the antiquity. So antiquity, we'll have a look at 4th century BC, and the first known translation in the Western world it's called Septuagint, because 70 translators translated it for 70 days. So this translation we're talking, I've got a picture of it here just for reference because we're translators and we see a pretty hefty tome. So we can actually say that this is a myth. So the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek happened in the 3rd century BC. So this one is called Septuagint, and that was the Bible translated into Greek because Jews at the time, they were so dispersed in the various places, they'd forgotten their mother tongue and they couldn't read their own Bible anymore. So we're talking about the Old Testament. So, and because of this, they needed a new version of the Bible, and that Bible has been commissioned as a major work. So 70 scholars, they each sat in a little cell and translated the whole volume. They didn't have, a head of a department of communications like Doha. They did not, divide it and conquered. They did the whole lot from A to Z. And after 70 days, they all came out of their little cells holding this volume of work. And when this work has been compared, all 70 versions were absolutely identical.
It was a miracle.
It was a miracle, yeah.
God. It was God. That was God, certainly.
That was God.
Behind.
And this work is regarded as such a major work in our history because this version, this Septuagint version of the Bible was later used as a source material for translation into other European languages like Georgian, Armenian, Coptic, Latin. So that was our cornerstone for other languages. There's another big translation from the Asias, from the kingdom of Kucha, which we know today as part of China. So there was a Buddhist monk. His name is, I say it as, I'm not going to say it, Kumarajiva. No, his name most probably was read as Kamrajva or something because he was a Buddhist monk. So he's translated the Diamond Sutra, and we still have that same translation because many works been conducted on it, and they all agree that he delivered the meaning really well from Sanskrit into Chinese. So at this point, so we're talking about antiquity, translation and translators, they are viewed as a bridge. So we're carrying across values between cultures. So we're not even talking yet about faithfulness or accuracy or any of that. So we've got two different cultures and we try to convey as accurate as possible. Now, later on, we start running into the discussion about how the translation ought to be done. And Cicero, he's quite a famous guy from an olden day, so almost at the beginning of times now.
No, way after the beginning of time. He was a Roman.
So we're getting close to the birth of a Christ. So we're getting close to the actual era after which we sort of count them as contemporaries. So now he's still an ancient guy, but I'll take Gillian's take. He's almost there. He is. Yeah. Let's count him as a contemporary. So he was a translator, as one of the other things. So he was many things. So he was the first one who started questioning, do we translate what? Like this verbum pro verbo versus sensum de sensu became on the surface of a debate. And I, as interpreter, I see it even now. If I go and translate and interpret somewhere, I see some professionals give me an instruction to translate exactly as I say, word for word. And sometimes I have and sometimes I don't have the confidence to say, shall I teach you how to do your job as well, please? But, you know, depends on the day. So he was the first one who said, shall I count them, you know, as coins, or do I pay them in weight? And I think this is like, for us as translators, we also, I guess, sometimes meet this particular demand, especially working in a free market. We're paid per word. And translating from language to language, the word count can differ dramatically. So word for word as a tactic might not really work. Look at this sexy man. This is Saint Jerome. So he picked up the flag about, you know, do we translate sense for sense or word for word? So he is quite famous for translating the Bible, of course, into, what language would this be? So into Latin. So he was doing a lot of work into Latin, and he sort of continued talking about word for word or sense for sense. So he was quite adamant, again, that the translator need to be done sense for sense. So, and except for his work on a Bible, because the Bible has been translated and, you know, it is considered a very good translation. He tried to do the words, because he said, I don't know the word of God. Who am I to sort of tiddle with the words of God? So moving on from Saint Jerome, he wasn't saint at his time. As you can see, he's completely naked. He became saint a little bit later, but he was the first one who, because of his involvement. Because of his involvement in this debate about sense for sense or word for word, we've got a term that us as translators and as scholars of translation we use still. It's called the dynamic equivalence. So we equate some forms in other languages, and even if they're not counted as word for word, we count them equal as if they were word for word. So we do have this particular form in our science that allows us to move from word for word to sense. However, we equate it as if a wordy equivalence. So thank you, Saint Jerome. Now moving on to the medieval times. So the things accelerate now for our industry and for our and for the world. The world started to get smaller. People talk, people write, people invent. And in the 5th century, we've got a few translations of Latin word was available because Latin was the most popular tongue. So we've got Alfred the Great, who was the King of England. So in the 9th century, he commissioned the Latin to English translations. So we're slowly starting to see the movement that helped develop languages. And Jesus and Ima would be very interested to know that the foundation of modern Spanish was actually started back then, when translations and translations started to be in a higher demand. So we've got a group. So they're from the Escuela de Traductores de Toledo. So they've established the School of Translation, and that was the 12th, 13th century. So they came from different parts of Europe, and they started to translate the important medical, scientific, religion, philosophical works into Castilian and Latin, from Hebrew, Greek, and Arabic. And the funniest thing happened, that this particular group and those works that started as translations, they were they revised the language, and that language led to beginning of the Spanish language, isn't it, Jesus? So we've got a group of scholars, our colleagues, that have, because of that work in the translation, they started the modern language. They formulate the language. So in the 13th century, Roger Bacon, so he is an English linguist, started to lay the foundation of our science, the translation science, something that the linguistic arm of our profession. So he said that translator must be fully knowledgeable in the source and the target language, no question there, so he can produce an accurate translation. One more thing he added is that at the same time, the translator must be a subject matter expert. So if we're translating medical texts, we must be doctors. If we're translating philosophical work, we must be very apt at philosophy. So this concept is very hard to sustain as a concept. So at the time where a person who knew how to speak a couple of languages, there was a really good chance that that particular person was also trained in some other arts. There were not so many arts at that time too. So back in 10th century, 12th century, this concept of a translator who translates, he must know the subject, may be held up. But as we're moving through the ages, this concept is wearing very, very thin. Right, oh, Renaissance. We're moving into a Renaissance. So we've got a school who translated all the work of Plato. So it was called the Platonic Academy. One of the Medicis, was a patron of it. So we are looking at translation of fiction. So we stopped talking about only important biblical work, things that only a handful of people could and wanted to read. We're moving into the time where a lot of people wanted to be enlightened. And a lot of people knew how to read and write, well, compared to the Dark Ages. And the idea of a translation started to change. So the work of Ficino, so we're talking about this new school of translation, they translated the Bibles and whatever. They helped develop translation work a little bit further because readers started demanding more accuracy in the rendering of religious and philosophical work. They're saying, what, translators, we want to know what the authors say. We don't want to think about your renditions. So we've got first fiction work translated. Floyd, how do we say it? La mort d'Arthur?
Should be la mort, la. Ready?
La mort d'Arthur. So these are the tales of King Arthur and other characters about the round table. So Thomas Mallory worked at it, and he has translated a work of fiction. So a lot of people now had an opinion about how it could be translated and what for. So how the translators can work, to what degree, and so, the readers started to give an input into our profession, where before we were gods. The way we translate, that's the way you eat, sorry. You can't return it to the kitchen. So now, slowly, the work is the translated work is reaching more and more people, and more people want to have an input into it. Ta-da! The rise of the West. So we've got a printing press now. And that's an indication of how fast this reading challenge is going through the masses. So the advancement in the printing press and the growth of the middle class in the 16th century, so developed translation as the demand for new literary work is increased. People want to read. So this is the period when an English scholar, his name was William Tyndale, so he translated the New Testament in 1525. So it was the first time the Bible was actually directly translated from Greek and Hebrew into English without bypassing the other translation. So he actually sadly died because of this translation, but you know, it's all good for art. So what's important here is because the Bible started to be translated directly into different languages, we immediately see the split in the church. So Martin Luther, he's produced the German version. Now we've got another arm of a church starting there. The Tudors translated theirs, and for one reason or another, we've got another arm of the church. So Catholic Church started to lose their grip on the followers, and us as the translators, we played a direct role in it. So we've allowed people to read ancient texts in their local tongue, in their local dialect, no problem. So we've got another critical differences. So there was another Bible that's been translated into Polish. So because of the differences, because of the Bible in different languages did not read as the original document, the blood started to boil. So we've got the Bible as an instrument of control started to spread in different groups of people in a different ways. So I guess the idea here is the critical differences in the translation in some of the passages and words in the Bible, so played a huge role in the division of Christianity in the West. So Roman Catholicism and other arms started to be born. So the book became available in Slovenia, in Spanish, in French, and Dutch. So, and I guess in terms of the development of languages, because Bible was one of the most translated and read books of all time, and at the time, the Bible translations, they also helped develop the modern languages in Europe. So every language the Bible was translated in, that language started its own, put its own identity roots because of that. All right, next one is the early modern era. So the reading is getting a little bit lighter, and the translations are getting translations and translators. We're starting to receive a bit of criticism. So we've got Miguel de Cervantes. He wrote Don Quixote. How do you say it in Spanish, Jesus?
You said it perfectly, Don Quixote.
Don Quixote.
Yeah.
So he is a creator of Don Quixote, but he also, had an opinion about translations. So when he looked at the translations that some translators would do, he say, "Oh, most translations look like a Flemish tapestry." So from another side, so meaning that you can still see some outlines of the meaning, but the primary figures is completely obliterated. So it's all up to the translators. It's all up to the reader then to figure out what was the author talking about. So the translations were a little bit shaky. So we've got an English translator at that time called John Dryden. and he translated Virgil's work, which was an ancient Roman time. So he translated it in a way that the Roman poet would write it if he was from England. So he said, look, it's not necessary to imitate the consciousness and subtlety of Virgil. I'm just going to write it as if he was living here in England. So pretty loose, I say. So we call it a translation, but strictly speaking, it was probably not. He's just a rendering of work. So Alexander Pope, so that's an English poet and translator, he thought he was translating Iliad for us. So he said the translator doesn't have a license to alter the original. So he said it's like drawing from real life, you know, features and alignment should not be changed. Us as a translators, we know that we don't have a license to change the original. We do have a license, however, to convey the meaning. So this century, our profession was talked in from the prism of transparency and faithfulness. So how transparent and faithful do we translate? So in this regard, so concerning this century, the faithfulness here meant the extent of the translation accuracy in rendering the source text into the target language was while considering the context and features of the original. So faithfulness is we need to work to as close as possible to the original. And the transparency here in this century, they defined as the translation must equate to the idiomatic translation. So, or how close the text appears as if it was written in the target language. So we need to conform to the idiom, syntax, and grammar, but otherwise we need to make it as transparent as possible. It was quite difficult to achieve when translating into tongues that have a polar syntax and grammar, like some of the Asian languages. All right, so here we're talking about faithfulness and transparency. The translations are quite loose. And now moving into the Industrial Revolution, we see that the view on translation is changing a little bit. And the translators that once were kings and gods, and the way we said, the way it went, so we started to lose a little bit of ground, a little bit even further. So we're talking about the period of French and American revolutions. So French led the way. We've got a German translator, Gottfried Herder. So he's reaffirmed the earlier statements of Martin Luther, that a translator should translate into his native language instead of the other way around. So when Martin Luther translated the Bible, he's realized that the translating into your mother tongue must be the way to go. So in this century, the concern for many translators focused on making reading the translating material easier. So translators were not only translating, but they also thought as their target audience, depending on who they're translating for. So an accuracy in this era is not a big issue. So if they thought of a passage might cause boredom, or if they didn't understand it, they just omitted it. To hell with it. I've got many things to translate. What is this about? Boring, not translating that. So, and they had a false impression that their translation style is the most proper, where the source material should conform to their, to their imagination, their translation. So some translators were so bold, they translated into languages they didn't speak. Sounds like me when I go to another country and I start speaking their language without knowing it. All right, so we do have one guy, so we call him a bright light of that era, Ignacy Krasinski. So he's an encyclopedist from Poland, and he says, he just reminded us at that time that the translator plays the unique part in a society, describing, well, he described the translation work as an art form, and it's a difficult work because the translators started to get a little bit of a bad rap. So he said the translation only should be done by people who are capable of seeing a better application of for translating other people's work instead of creating their own. So he said they should put translation at a higher level of service for their country. But his voice was very small, and a lot of translators had big and loud voices, and they were translating fiction. Who cares? Ignacy, we're not listening to you. All right, and then we're going to the Industrial Revolution. So the start of the Industrial Revolution, and translation in this century, it's all about style and accuracy. So all of a sudden, as the translators, we had to start conforming to the voice of reason. So you remember in antiquity, us as translators, we were scholars, we were learned men, and we were gods. And then we went through this wave where we were like little children jumping up and down. Just because we could speak 2 languages, we will do the way we want. And then slowly we're coming back to some sort of a scientific approach to our profession. So in this era, the translation policy centered on text. So it was a Victorian era. Body language was the exception to the rule. So explanation and footnotes became available, so were deemed necessary by some translators. So translators aimed to tell the readers that the text or a book they were enjoying, there were translations from foreign originals. So we've got a couple of theories floating around in this era, and one of them, it was a Friedrich Schleiermacher of Germany. So he said that translation could use 2 translation methods: transparency or domestication. So brings the writer to the readers. Another one was fidelity or foreignization, so that brought readers to the writers. So what we're saying is that when we translate it in a manner that readers know this is definitely when they're trying to take me to the thinking of the author, or the author is brought closer to the readers, speaking in a language the readers would understand. Conflicting, but they tried. So on the other hand, we do have a scholar in Asia, as a Chinese translator. His name is Yong Fu, and he's developed a 3-facet translation theory. So now we're talking about us translators being scholars of a translation science, not scholars of medicine and philosophy and lawyering or anything else. So these are people that are thinking about our science, us as linguists, us as masters of the language. What theories do we need to conform to when translating? So he's developed this 3-facet translation theory, and the theories are, so faithfulness. This is something we still employ, just in a different context. So faithfulness in his rendering was the being close to the source material in context, in meaning. Expressiveness. So this is the accessibility of the translation to the intended audience. And elegance. So this is the availability of the translation in a language that target accepts as educated. So just, rendering a register a little bit to bring it to the influential masses, not all the masses. All the masses are not all that, important. So what do you think, you as my colleagues, as translators, so looking at these 3 three theories. So which one do you think was the most prominent at the time? Faithfulness, expressiveness, or elegance?
Sorry, do you mean
At that time?
at that time in China or in Europe?
In Europe.
In Europe, faithfulness, I imagine.
Anybody else?
Well, there could be a clue because she's written expressiveness in a different color, maybe.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Floyd, I didn't hear you. So yes, correct.
You're muted, Floride.
I think you muted.
Okay.
So which one did you pick?
I thought elegance.
I thought so. I was hoping that somebody
So
would
French.
pick. Yes, it's so French. Somebody would pick elegance. Yes, no, it is definitely expressiveness. So because the idea of elegance meant that we will only serve one particular category of a reader, when expressiveness meant anyone could read it. So we just read it in a manner that our target audience will understand. And the target audience was wide, and because we're talking about the 19th century, the commerce was in a full swing, and the more people can read and understand it, the more money we can make from translating and printing. All right, so these theories, however, it's quite an important moment for us as translation theorists and linguists, because these theories have taken on, and we still use the bones of it in describing our profession today and forming our code of ethics on these principles. So these theories had a huge effect on translation work across the globe. Ooh, now let's jump back to the antiquity. But the reason we're jumping back to the antiquity now is because we just found it. We have found a Rosetta Stone. Oh, what a moment. Oh, what a moment. And how lovely that we found a Rosetta Stone now that we've already put some foundations in regards to our translation theories. How we translate, what do we translate? And do we translate the word for word, sense for sense, meaning for meaning? Who are we translating for? In this amazing moment, we find a Rosetta Stone. So it was a tumultuous time. Napoleon is campaigning in Egypt, threatening British hold on India. Scary, yes. So it's a little bit vague how we actually found it. The idea is the French soldiers were digging some fort, and they saw this piece of work was used as a rubble mounted into the wall. One of the officers said, "Oh my goodness, that sounds interesting," and that's how we've got it. However, French didn't hold it for too long because Brits took over, and that's it. We call it a Rosetta Stone because it was found in the town of Rashid, and they call it a Rosetta. And whoop-de-doo, one thing after another, French held it for a little bit, and then Brits got it, and it sailed into Portsmouth in February 1802. And here you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We have a stone that might put us out of some of our miseries. Do you remember this? We've had all these scratchings. We've got tons and tons of these scratchings everywhere, thrown around museums and private collections, and cryptographers been breaking their heads over it, not knowing what it is. At some stage we said, well, it's all about beer, let's forget about that. And here we've got a stone that is written in 3 languages. Whatever is written on this stone is not actually all that interesting. So this one, we can get to it later. So the importance of the stone was that the writing is an official message. It's called a decree. It's about the Ptolemy V. It says that the priests of the temple in Memphis supported the king. And the king in turn supported them. How did he support them? Oh, he gave them a tax evasion scheme. So here we have it. The stone reminded everyone that some things were due to the church by the decree of the king. So it has allocated amount of gold, grain, cloth, animal, beer. It's all there, ladies and gentlemen. So the Rosetta Stone was just one of those copies of this decree. It was plastered all over Egypt. So for everyone to remember that the church's got a special connection to the king, and they have, a little bit of a tax lien. So as a message itself, it's not important at all. But what's important is that this stone, the message is written in 3 different languages. So one of them is a hieroglyphic message. It was meant just for the priests. Another one was written in Demotic. So this is for plebs, for normal people to read. And it was written in Greek because Greeks were the rulers of the land. So everybody could just remind themselves why is my animal being taken from me, or why half my beer is gone again. So because it's been due to the king. But the importance of the stone in the history of translation and the history of cryptography and in understanding of how the languages were formed is immense. So when it was discovered, nobody knew how to read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. So the inscriptions say the same thing in 3 different scripts, so the scholars could finally read. So there were still scholars in 19th centuries, they could read ancient Greek, and they started deciphering something. So before that, we thought that hieroglyphics were like emojis, little pictographs. But we have discovered with the help of Rosetta Stone that it is not. The hieroglyphics were actual phonetic representation. We've got a French linguist to thank for this. His name is Jean-François Champollion. Did I say it in the right way?
Unmute, Floride.
Champollion? Yeah.
Is it Champollion or Champollion?
How would you say it? I'll say it the way you say it.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I thought his name was Jean-François Champollion, but maybe his name is Jean-François Champollion.
It's on the screen, Floride, under Rosetta Stone.
Well, it's not on my screen.
Should be.
Champollion.
It is Champollion.
Champollion.
I don't have it on my screen.
What?
No?
Really?
Wow.
On the right-hand side, blue, Rosetta Stone. Under that, the guy's name.
What do you have on your screen?
Oh, yes, it is.
Wikipedia says he's Champollion as well.
It is Champollion. Yes, I thought it was. I'm just looking at 2 different screens, unfortunately, because I can't fit it all. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It is definitely Champollion. That's
Champollion. I'm just going to change it for me. Champollion. So he's deciphered the Rosetta Stone, and he has cracked the hieroglyphic code. So, and he showed that the hieroglyphics were a combination of phonetic and ideographic signs rather than just symbolic pictures. So we thought they were emojis. And he is heralded as a founding father of Egyptology. But that was great because we could already translate everything we read according to our standard of translation. We followed the rules in translation of the words, in called translation, whatever you call it, or cracking of a Rosetta Stone, they've applied our 3 principles of translation. They couldn't avoid it. The translation science already moved that far that they couldn't just sit there and make up things and omit things they didn't understand and substitute for whatever they thought that should be there. They masterfully followed our translation theory in the deciphering of a Rosetta Stone. So for us as professionals, as translators, it was a tremendous triumph. Righto, moving on to the 20th century. So a translation is an art form, and we've got many people conforming it. So translation became more prominent, structured in the 20th century. So where interpreting the context of the written text became important. So we've got Polish translator Aniela Zagorska. So she translated a lot of work of Joseph Conrad. I've got Joseph Conrad there for you. So she's translated into Polish and gave a great advice. So Joseph Conrad was her uncle, and he viewed translation as an art form that gives translators choices, which meant interpreting some of the text instead of translating it. So as we spoke at the beginning, imagination and creativity is our license. We also know Jorge Luis Borges. Borges or Borges?
Unmute,
Sorry.
Jesus.
Borges.
Borges. So Borges of Argentina. So he's translated plenty of fictional work. So Virginia Woolf, Whitman, Edgar Allan Poe, you name it. He was the translator of the time. So he's translated it all into Spanish. And he also believed that translation is an art. He's quite an influential figure. He's our colleague. So he said that a translator can do improvements on the original work and at times may stray from the source text. So he believed that contradictory and alternative translations of the same material can be valid. So just a reminder that a translation is not an exact art. That's why we have this license for creativity and imagination. In 20th century, we started speaking about literal translations, but they have to be confined to scientific, academic, historic, and religious material, not really literal. All right, the present day. And the translation studies. So first started in the latter part of the 20th century, the official translation studies as a subject. So it's an academic course. I've just finished it. So it includes various subjects, terminology, semiotics, philosophy, philology, linguistics, history, computer science, comparative literature. So as the translation study, as a science, it is a legit subject now. Contemporary translators help improve languages through learn words and borrowing terms. So remember this equivalence that Saint Jerome offered us? So that this equivalence is now used to enrich other languages. English language has I don't know, quadrupled, multiplied in time in its volume because of borrowing and calc. So us as the translators, we can take full credit for it, for enriching the languages. So we also have, you know, the machine translation, as we had a look at it last week or 2 weeks ago. So technology created an internet, created a global market. So you and I were now a part of the big community of translation. So we can work now without leaving homes as we do now. So translation and translators is still a huge part of our economy. So, and before the end, I wanted to quickly touch on the code of ethics as we have it today. So today we use an AUSIT code of ethics and a code of conduct for translators and interpreters. And the thing that we still have, remember how we had a look at elegance and and expressiveness and anything you want. So today, only one of those features made it into our code of ethics that we must abide is accuracy. So accuracy, we said, is that accuracy, use their best professional judgment in remaining faithful at all time to the meaning of text and messages. So our code of ethics sticks true to our license to be creative and use our imagination when we render from one text to another. So it demands faithfulness between the messages. But how we get there, we are, as professionals, we can make that judgment. And the future of a translation. So there is a talk that translators are going to die out. It's going to be a dead art. Not so, because translation is an art. So today's research showing that it will take, even with this gigantic steps in a neural translation, machine is unlikely to replace the translators. We still need to use our own judgment in translating. Well, voila, here you have it. We've got a huge bibliography for this one. The end.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Olga.
It's excellent.
That was
So how
brilliant.
did you find it?
I was excellent. I absolutely loved the detail of the 70 translators of the Torah
Yeah, that was
into
fantastic.
Greek.
The miraculous translation.
Yeah.
That's how we
It's good.
know it's
And also-
been.
And also there was a tinge of irony in the words of having a Polish a translator translating Joseph Conrad's work into Polish. There's something funny about it for some
Yes.
reason.
Yes.
Well, so the particular expressiveness, so the right expressiveness could be delivered, so the wider masses could read it.
I think like Konrad Nabokov, later in life, he became less and less confident in his ability to write in Russian as well, because he was writing in French and English.
And English.
More than in Russian, so.
And he was
Konrad was the
fantastic.
same.
Yeah.
His writing was wonderful. I was interested in Ptolemy. Was he the 5th century? No. Was he the one who lived 100 AD? Was he involved in the church, or was it some other religion?
Which one?
Ptolemy? Ptolemy.
Ptolemy. No, he lived way before the Christ. So the Ptolemy the Fifth is the one whose decree is written on Rosetta Stone.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be the church as we know it. It would have been.
No, that was a church of Isis and the rest of them. The god of Ra, the god of sun.
Yeah.
The Rosetta Stone, I've got a rendering of how it actually looked like in a full form.
Yep.
So there is.
I can see it there. Yes.
Yeah, because Ptolemy was the son of God. He's like King Tut. He's very.
Yep.
It's
I thought he
interesting
was
as well
early.
with the translation of the Bible and how all these phrases have crept into other languages, because I remember Margarita said to me once, she said, we have this expression in Spanish that when someone gives you a horse, you never look at his teeth. I said, Margarita, we have that exact same expression in English. It also exists in Russian and probably every other language, because it's straight out of the Bible. And she was she was shocked. She said, no, that's a Spanish expression. It's
funny.
Everywhere.
It is very interesting. I was wondering, in fact, when you can see all the schisms in the church, if as translators, perhaps we should be held responsible for the schisms in Camelot.
Scapegoat.
I hope not.
We'll leave it
I think we
Yes,
used to
scapegoat.
be, actually. Remember when the Russians would always say, oh, there's something wrong with the translation? They used to do it years ago.
Not too much.
No, in the past they did occasionally anyway.
Must have been when I was not there.
Yeah, it must have been. That would be why.
Would it be when they didn't want to play by the rules?
Yes, it was an excuse.
I think the word scapegoat, the term scapegoat, is also from the Bible, Jill.
Yeah. Oh, there are so many. I mean, I think
Yeah.
in English it's all Shakespeare in the Bible. And yep.
All right.
I guess looking at the development of our profession, sort of, you can't escape this feeling of being proud, you know, to be a part of that crowd.
Oh yeah, and you know, all those people who were translating stories from long ago, they always changed them. It was folk literature in almost, you know. There was no point in taking something from somewhere else if you didn't change it a bit. You know,
I guess it's most poignant in a spoken tongue. So when we tell the stories, the storytelling is the most ancient art of entertainment. And once it's written down, we sort of then
you look at it differently.
Yeah, our signs take root.
But still, all those Middle Ages, all that literature of the Middle Ages was always had so many variations from place to place and from dialect to dialect, you know, from source text to source text in all those medieval manuscripts.
Well, I'm so pleased you liked it. I'm thinking next time, would you like to, I can prepare one on localization, although it's a little bit boring, or we can have a look at some science, we can have a look at appraisal or functional grammar.
What's the concept of functional grammar?
Functional grammar, it's quite a new science, and the concept of it is that the science classified the language from the point of view of its function, rather than syntax and punctuation and the normal grammar. So it divided each meaningful unit of language into whatever units there are, and analyze it from that point of view. So the tone, the tenor, we've got 7 different aspects to the functional grammar. It's an Australian science. It's been done by Michael Halliday, and the first language he's researched was French. So we've got a very good idea of functional grammar from the point of view of French. So we've got now it's in Japanese, Korean. We don't have functional grammar devised into Russian yet, but Spanish. It's quite an interesting concept. It's very useful for translation science, for text analysis, and it's very cool.
I think it sounds interesting to me, but
yeah. All right. I will prepare that.
So 11:30 we have another assembly, right?
We do.
Yeah.
Time to make a cup of tea, though.
What a
All right,
day.
see you soon.
See you then.
Bye.
Thanks a lot, Olga.
Thanks,
Thank
Olga.
you.
for coming.
It was excellent.
Thank you.
Cheers.
See you in 20.